The air in the great hall of Ashenvale reeked of dominance and old wine. 300 bodies pressed against the stone walls, their collective heat turning the winter night into something fevered and dangerous. Thalassa Ravencroft moved through the
You
crowd
must
like
be
a
strong
ghost,
now.
her feet
I
silent
will.
on the
I
polished
promise.
floor,
Good.
her
Go now
eyes
with my
fixed on the
blessing.
ground. She carried a
I
silver
can feel the
tray
energy
laden with
flowing
crystal
through you.
goblets filled with blood-red
so warm,
wine,
it's working.
and she did not spill a single drop. She never
The people
did.
are with us.
In the
We
kingdom of
cannot falter.
Ashenvale, scent was
Their
everything.
hope is our strength.
It was your rank, your soul, your destiny carved into the marrow of your bones. The high alphas smelled of cedar and smoke and power. The omegas carried the sweetness of vanilla and spring rain. Even the betas had their place, their scent a steady hum of earth and iron. But Thalassa, she had nothing. No scent, no rank, no existence. A null. She was 23 years old and invisible. The great hall blazed with torchlight and the glow of 100 candles, their flames casting writhing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. The massive oak table at the center groaned under the weight of roasted venison, honey-glazed pheasant, and towers of winter fruit. This was the full moon gathering the night when the pack came together to celebrate their strength, their unity, their place in the world. Thalassa served them all, and none of them looked at her. She refilled goblets, cleared plates, and moved between the bodies with practiced precision. Her hands were steady, her face was a careful blank. She had learned long ago to make herself small, to fold inward until she was nothing more than a shadow in a room full of fire. At the head table sat the nobles. Lord Mordain, the High Counselor, his silver hair swept back from a face carved from granite. Beside him, Lady Amaryllis, a vision in crimson silk, her blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders. She was a high alpha from the northern wastes, brought here to forge an alliance through marriage. Her scent was intoxicating, a blend of wild roses and frozen pine that made every alpha in the room turn their heads. And at the very center, the empty throne, carved from black obsidian, its high back etched with the sigils of the Nightshade bloodline. Empty because the Alpha King did not attend gatherings anymore. He had not attended anything in months. Thalassa moved toward the high table tray balanced on one hand. Lady Amaryllis's goblet was empty, the ruby wine staining the bottom like old blood. Thalassa reached forward, careful not to meet anyone's eyes, and began to pour. A hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Thalassa froze. Clumsy creature. The voice was sharp, cold, dripping with contempt. Matron Oleander loomed over her, the head of the household staff, a woman built like a mountain and twice as unyielding. Her graying hair was pulled into a severe knot, and her eyes were the color of stone. You spilled wine on Lady Amaryllis's gown. Thalassa's breath caught. She looked down. The tray tilted slightly in her other hand, a single drop of wine rolling down the side of the decanter. But Lady Amaryllis's gown was pristine, unmarked. I didn't. Are you calling me a liar? Matron Oleander's grip tightened, her nails digging into Thalassa's skin. The hall went silent. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward them. Thalassa felt the weight of their stares like a physical thing pressing down on her shoulders, stealing the air from her lungs. Lady Amaryllis leaned back in her chair, a slow smile curving her lips. It's fine, Matron. The girl meant no harm. But Matron Oleander did not let go. She is a defect, a stain on this household. And tonight, under the blood moon, we cannot afford mistakes. Thalassa's heart hammered against her ribs. The blood moon. She had almost forgotten. Once a year, when the moon turned crimson and full, the alphas grew restless, their wolves prowling just beneath the skin. It was a night of ritual, of ceremony, of blood, and of sacrifice. Lord Mordain rose from his seat, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. He was 55 years old, a warrior who had fought in the Great War and returned with scars that mapped his arms and chest. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that commanded armies. Matron Oleander is correct. We cannot afford distractions tonight. His eyes pale gray and cold, fixed on Thalassa. The null has proven herself unfit for service in the Great Hall. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Unfit. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Thalassa's knees trembled, but she forced herself to remain standing. She would not kneel. Not here. Not in front of them. She should be exiled, someone shouted from the back of the hall. Send her into the blizzard. Let the cold take her. No, Lord Mordain said, and the hall fell silent again. Exile is too kind. Tonight is the blood moon. The Alpha King requires attendance. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Attendance. Everyone knew what that meant. The king's chambers were forbidden during the blood moon. The feral madness took him, turned him into something monstrous, something that could not be controlled. Those who entered did not return. Matron Oleander's smile widened. On your knees, girl. Thalassa's legs gave out. She sank to the stone floor, the tray clattering beside her wine, spilling across the polished surface like a pool of blood. The crowd leaned in their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Broken, someone whispered. Useless. Trash. Lord Mordain stepped down from the high table, his boots echoing in the silence. He stopped in front of Thalassa, towering over her kneeling form. Thalassa Ravencroft, he intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You are hereby sentenced to serve the Alpha King's chambers this night. Should you survive until dawn, you may return to your duties. Should you not, he paused, letting the implication hang. May the moon have mercy. The crowd erupted in cheers and jeers, their voices a cacophony of cruelty. Thalassa kept her eyes on the floor, her hands curled into fists at her sides. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. Matron Oleander yanked her to her feet, her grip bruising. Go, now, before I change my mind and throw you to the wolves myself. Thalassa stumbled toward the side door, the crowd parting like a sea, their laughter following her into the cold stone corridor beyond. The hallway was dark and empty, lit only by the occasional torch flickering in its iron sconce. Thalassa leaned against the wall, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Her wrists throbbed where Matron Oleander had grabbed her red marks already blooming on her pale skin. The king's chambers. During the blood moon, she was going to die. The thought settled over her like a blanket of ice cold and suffocating. She pressed her forehead against the stone, willing her hands to stop shaking. The vial. She still had the vial. Her fingers fumbled at the hidden pocket inside her apron, and she felt the cool, smooth glass beneath her fingertips. The suppressant. Her lifeline. The only thing standing between her and discovery. Thalassa pulled the vial free, holding it up to the torchlight. The liquid inside was pale green, flecked with bits of dried herbs. Bitter chamomile, crushed lavender, and the rarest ingredient of all, silverbark root, harvested under a new moon. It was the recipe her mother had taught her, whispered in the dark when Thalassa was just a child. Her mother. The memory hit her like a physical blow, sharp and sudden. She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 8 years old again, standing in the shadows of the execution square. 15 years ago, the sky was gray, choked with smoke from the pyre. Thalassa crouched behind a stack of barrels, her small hands pressed over her mouth to muffle the sound of her sobs. The crowd had gathered in the square, hundreds of them, their faces twisted with fear and fascination. At the center, bound to a wooden stake, was her mother. Alara Ravencroft was beautiful even then. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, the same deep amber as Thalassa's, were calm. She did not scream. She did not beg. Lord Mordain stood at the front of the crowd, a scroll in his hands. He was younger, than his hair still dark, but his face was just as hard. Alara Ravencroft, he read, his voice carrying over the square. You stand accused of blood sorcery, of using forbidden arts to manipulate the natural order. The council has found you guilty. The sentence is death by fire. A murmur ran through the crowd. Blood sorcery. The words were a curse, a condemnation. Alara lifted her chin. I am no sorceress, Lord Mordain. I am a healer. I ease pain. I save lives. You corrupt them, Mordain snapped. Your kind creates bonds that make alphas weak dependent. My own brother fell to such weakness. He mated one of your kind, and when she died, he went feral. He killed 12 innocents before we put him down like a rabid dog. Alara's eyes softened. I am sorry for your loss, my lord. But love is not a curse. Love? Mordain's laugh was bitter. You call it love. I call it poison. He nodded to the executioner, who stepped forward with a torch. The flames licked at the kindling stacked around the pyre. Alara's gaze swept the crowd, and for just a moment, she found Thalassa hiding in the shadows. Their eyes met. Her mother's lips moved, forming words that only Thalassa could see. Hide. Be strong. Survive. And then the flames rose, and Thalassa looked away. The memory faded, leaving Thalassa alone in the cold hallway. She opened her eyes, the vial clutched tight in her fist. Her mother had died because she was different. Because the council feared what they did not understand. Thalassa had spent 15 years hiding, suppressing her true nature, pretending to be nothing. A null. A ghost. But tonight, under the blood moon, there was no more hiding. She pushed herself off the wall and began the long walk toward the king's wing. The king's chambers were located in the oldest part of the palace, a labyrinth of stone corridors that twisted and turned like the inside of a maze. Thalassa passed servants huddled in doorways, their eyes wide with fear. Outside, the blizzard raged, snow battering against the narrow windows, the wind howling like a living thing. She climbed the spiral staircase, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At the top, a set of iron-bound doors loomed before her, black and imposing. A guard stood on either side, their faces pale, their hands gripping their spears with white-knuckled intensity. "You're the null," one of them said. It was not a question. Thalassa nodded. The other guard shook his head. "Poor girl. May the moon be kind." They pulled the doors open and heat rolled out like a physical wave, thick and oppressive. Thalassa stepped inside and the doors slammed shut behind her. The king's chambers were a nightmare made real. The air reeked of ozone and old blood, a smell so thick it coated the back of her throat. The fire in the hearth roared flames leaping high, but the heat did nothing to dispel the chill that crept down Thalassa's spine. The room was massive with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with weapons. Swords, axes, and shields, all of them stained with rust or blood or both. And at the center, hunched over a massive mahogany desk, was the Alpha King, Caliph Nightshade. Thalassa had never seen him up close. She had only glimpsed him from afar, a towering figure in black, his face shadowed by the hood of his cloak. But now in the flickering firelight she saw him clearly. He was a monster. His shirt was discarded, revealing a back mapped with silver scars. They crisscrossed his skin like a spider's web, some old and faded, others still pink and raw. His muscles were corded, bunching and flexing as he gripped the edges of the desk so hard the wood began to splinter. But it was the veins that made Thalassa's blood run cold. Black veins, thick and pulsing, crawled up his neck like the roots of some poisonous plant. They spread across his shoulders, down his arms, and when he turned his head slightly, she saw them reaching toward his jaw. Shadow poison. She had heard the stories. A cursed blade from the Great War 10 years ago when Ashenvale had fought against the Eastern Kingdoms. The blade had pierced Calith's chest, and though the wound had healed, the poison had remained festering, feeding on his alpha rage. He was dying, slowly, painfully. A low growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating through the floor. Thalassa froze her hand instinctively, reaching for the vial in her apron. "Leave." The word was a rasp, barely human. His voice was gravel and pain, the sound of something breaking. Thalassa swallowed hard. I have your evening tray, Your Majesty." Oh, another growl, deeper this time. "I said leave, now, or I will tear you apart." She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to flee, to escape before it was too late. But her feet would not move. She stood rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on the black veins spreading across his skin. The shadow poison. The mark was over his heart, a pulsing web of darkness that seemed to throb in time with his heartbeat. She could see it from here, a sickly purple glow beneath the surface of his skin. Thalassa took a step forward. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice trembling. "The poison. It's spreading." Calith's head snapped up. His eyes were no longer human. They were molten gold, burning with a feral intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. His pupils were slits like a wolf's, and they locked onto her with predatory focus. "What did you say?" Thalassa's courage faltered, but she forced herself to speak. "The mark. Over your heart. It's worse than it was." He stared at her for a long moment, his chest heaving, his hands still gripping the desk. Then slowly he straightened. He was massive, easily 6 feet 4 inches, his frame broad and powerful despite the poison eating him alive. "How would you know?" he demanded. I Thalassa hesitated. "I've studied healing. My mother was a healer." A bitter laugh escaped him. "A healer, of course. And what makes you think you can help me, a girl dozens have tried? All of them failed." "I don't know if I can," Thalassa admitted, "but I can try." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something almost human, but then the feral rage surged back and he snarled, his teeth bared. "Get out!" Thalassa took another step forward, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She reached into her apron, pulling out the small leather satchel she kept hidden there. Inside were dried herbs, bandages, a few glass vials of tincture, and the suppressant. Her fingers brushed the cool glass and she pulled it free, holding it up to the firelight. The pale green liquid shimmered, catching the glow of the flames. Calith's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "A sedative," and she lied. "It might help with the pain." He laughed again, harsh and broken. "Nothing helps with the pain." But even as he spoke, his gaze lingered on the vial. Thalassa moved closer, step by careful step, until she was standing just a few feet away. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the raw power coiled beneath the surface. She set the tray down on the edge of the desk, her hands shaking. The vial slipped from her fingers. Time slowed. The glass tumbled through the air, glinting in the firelight. Thalassa reached for it, but her hand closed on empty air. The vial struck the stone hearth with a sharp crack, and the glass shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The bitter smell of herbs evaporated instantly, rising like smoke. And then something else bloomed. It started as a whisper, a faint thread of scent that curled through the air. Wild winter jasmine, sweet and sharp, mixed with the rich warmth of ancient honey. It was delicate and powerful all at once, a scent that did not belong in this world of stone and blood. Thalessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Number. Kayla's head snapped up. His nostrils flared and his entire body went rigid. The growl in his chest died. The room fell into absolute silence. Thalassa stood frozen, her heart hammering, her mind racing. The suppressant, the only thing keeping her scent hidden, gone, shattered on the floor. And now he could smell her. Caliph moved. One moment he was across the room and the next he was there looming over her, his massive frame blocking out the firelight. Thalassa stumbled back, but he was faster. His hand shot out, slamming against the door behind her head, the impact rattling her teeth. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and inhaled. It was a long, shuddering breath, as if he were pulling the very soul out of her body. His eyes fluttered closed, and for the first time since she had entered the room, the tension in his shoulders eased. "What are you?" he whispered. Thalassa's breath came in short, shallow gasps. "I'm nothing. I'm a null. Please, your majesty, let me go." A null. His eyes opened, and they were no longer feral. They were human, clear, and filled with something that looked like wonder. "You lie." His other hand came up, fingers brushing against her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His skin was rough, calloused from years of holding a sword, but his touch was almost gentle. "You smell like the end of my madness," he murmured. Like silence after a decade of screaming. Thalassa's knees threatened to buckle. She could feel the heat of him, the raw power coiled in every muscle. But beneath that, she felt something else. A pull, a connection. It was electric, thrumming through the air between them, setting her nerves alight. Calith's hand moved from her throat to her jaw, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed over her cheek, and the moment their skin met, a spark erupted. Golden light flared between them, bright and blinding. Thalassa cried out, and Calith jerked back, staring at his hand as if it had betrayed him. The light faded, but the feeling remained. A warmth spreading through Thalassa's chest, sinking into her bones, wrapping around her heart. "No," she breathed. "No, this can't be mine." The word was a growl, possessive and absolute. Caliph stepped forward again, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. "You're mine," he said, his voice rough with wonder and disbelief. "My mate, my wolf knows, even if you don't." Thalassa shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "I'm not. I can't be." But even as she spoke, she felt it. The bond, snapping into place like a lock clicking shut. Invisible chains wrapping around her soul, binding her to this man, this alpha, this king. "You're not leaving," Kayla said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Not tonight, not ever." His mouth descended toward hers, and Thalassa's world tilted on its axis. The kiss did not come. At the last moment, a sharp knock echoed through the chamber. Caliph froze his lips, a breath away from hers, and snarled, "What?" The door creaked open, and Lord Mordain stepped inside, flanked by 4 council members. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide as they took in the scene before them. The Alpha King, half-dressed and feral, holding a null maid against the door. "Your Majesty," Mordain said, his voice carefully neutral. "We heard reports. We came to ensure your safety." Caliph did not move. His hand remained on Thalassa's neck, his body shielding hers from view. "I am fine." "With respect, Your Majesty, you do not appear fine." Mordain's gaze flickered to Thalassa, and his eyes narrowed. "What is she doing here?" "She brought my evening tray." "And stayed?" Mordain took a step forward. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. The girl is a null. She has no business in your private chambers." Caliph's grip on Thalassa tightened, his fingers pressing into her skin. "She stays." The council members exchanged glances. Mordain's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty, the blood moon affects all alphas. Your judgment may be compromised." "My judgment," Caliph said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "is perfectly clear." Thalassa could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. She forced herself to speak, her voice small but steady. "I administered a sedative, my lords." His Majesty collapsed. "I was ensuring he did not harm himself." The lie came easily, smoothly. Mordain's eyes narrowed further, but he did not challenge her. "A sedative," he repeated. "And where did you acquire such a thing, girl?" "My mother was a healer," Thalassa said, lifting her chin. "She taught me." Mordain's expression darkened. "Your mother, Alara Ravencroft." The name hung in the air like a curse. Thalassa's heart sank. "Yes, my lord." "The woman executed for blood sorcery." "She was a healer," Thalassa said, her voice breaking. "Not a sorceress, Mordain stepped closer, his eyes cold. And yet here you are practicing the same forbidden arts. Kayla's hand left Thalessa's neck, moving to her shoulder. He pulled her slightly behind him, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. She saved my life, he said. That is all that matters. Mordain's gaze shifted between them, calculation flickering behind his eyes. Finally, he inclined his head. Very well, Your Majesty. If you insist the girl is useful, then she shall remain, as your personal physician. Thalessa's breath caught. Physician, a position of rank of importance. It was a lie, but it was also a lifeline. Thank you, Lord Mordain, Caliph said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. The council members filed out, Mordain lingering in the doorway. He looked at Thalassa one last time, his expression unreadable. Do not make me regret this decision, girl. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud. Thalassa sagged against the door, her legs finally giving out. Caliph caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist, holding her upright. You lied for me, she whispered. I lied for us, he corrected. His hand moved to her face, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. You're mine, Thalassa Ravencroft, and I protect what's mine. The bond hummed between them, warm and undeniable. Thalassa closed her eyes, exhaustion and fear, and something else, something dangerous flooding through her. What happens now, she asked. Caliph's thumb brushed over her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. Now he said you stay, and we figure out what the hell you are. Because he knew just as she did that she was no null. The scent that had filled the room, the golden spark that had flared between them, the way his wolf had gone silent for the first time in 10 years, none of it made sense. Unless she was something else entirely. Something the council had tried to erase. Something forbidden. Thalassa opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. In the firelight, his eyes were no longer feral. They were human, warm, and filled with a desperate hope she had never seen before. I don't know what I am, she admitted. Then we'll find out together. He guided her to the armchair by the hearth, settling her into the soft velvet cushions. She was trembling, her body exhausted from the adrenaline, the fear, the overwhelming rush of the mate bond snapping into place. Caliph knelt in front of her, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, caging her in. But it did not feel like a trap. It felt like safety. Sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, Thalassa whispered. The poison is quiet, he finished. For the first time in years, it's quiet. Because of you. His hand found hers and their fingers intertwined. The golden spark flared again, softer this time, a gentle warmth that spread through her chest. Thalassa's eyes drifted closed, and for the first time in 15 years, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen. And as she slipped into sleep, the Alpha King watched over her, his wolf finally at peace. Dawn broke over Ashenvale like a blade of cold light, slicing through the heavy velvet curtains of the king's chambers. Thalassa woke in the armchair by the hearth, her body stiff from sleeping upright, her neck aching. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories crashed back like a wave. The vial shattering, the scent explosion. Caliph's golden eyes burning into hers. The mate bond snapping into place like a chain around her soul. She sat up, her heart racing, and found him watching her from across the room. Caliph Nightshade stood by the window, fully dressed now in black leather and dark wool, his arms crossed over his chest. The morning light turned his hair to burnished copper, and his eyes, no longer feral gold, but a deep amber, tracked her every movement with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're still here, he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but the feral rasp was gone. You ordered me not to leave, Your Majesty. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And your guards aren't exactly prone to letting gnolls wander out of the royal chambers at 3 in the morning. Thalassa stood smoothing down her rumpled apron. Her wrists still bore the bruises from Matron Oleander's grip, purple and ugly against her pale skin. She tucked her hands behind her back, hiding them. Caliph noticed anyway. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking her wrist in his hand. His touch was gentle, careful, as if she were made of glass. She did this. It was not a question. Thalassa nodded. Caliph's jaw tightened, and for a moment the gold flickered back into his eyes. I should have her exiled for touching you. She's the head of household staff, Thalassa said quietly. She has every right to discipline servants. You are not a servant anymore. His thumb traced the edge of the bruised feather light. You're my physician, my responsibility. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Physician, a lie they had both agreed to, a fragile shield against the council's suspicion. But beneath it, the truth hummed. Mate, bond, mine. Thalassa pulled her hand away, stepping back. The air between them crackled with tension, the same electric charge that had sparked when their skin touched the night before. The scent, Kayla said, his voice dropping lower. It's still there. Thalassa's heart stuttered. She had hoped foolishly that the effect would fade with the dawn, that without the suppressant, her scent would simply disappear, return to the nothingness she had always been. But it hadn't. It's fainter than last night, Kayla continued, stepping closer. But it's there, like wild jasmine after a winter storm. He reached out his fingers, brushing a strand of dark hair away from her face. The touch sent a shiver down her spine. It's a curse, Thalassa whispered. I've spent my life hiding it because I knew this would happen. I didn't want to be a prize. I didn't want to be a cure. Kayla's expression darkened. You think I see you as a bottle of medicine? A tool to keep my wolf at bay? Don't you? She challenged, her fear giving way to a spark of defiance. You're the Alpha King. You're losing your mind to the shadow poison. And suddenly the scentless defect turns out to be the only thing that can quiet the beast. It's convenient. His hand dropped from her face and he gripped the arms of the chair behind her, leaning down until they were nose to nose. The scent of him surrounded her, cedar and rain, an ancient power overwhelming and intoxicating. It is many things, Thalassa Ravencroft, he said, his voice a low rumble. But convenient is not one of them. My council expects me to mate with Lady Amaryllis to solidify our borders. My people expect a queen with a lineage they can trace back 3 centuries. They will see you as a threat. They will call this witchcraft. He straightened, pacing to the hearth. The fire had burned down to embers, casting his face in shadow. But for the first time in 10 years, he continued, I woke up without the sound of screaming in my head. I woke up quiet. I cannot let that go. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Kayla's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes flashing gold. Your Majesty! The voice was muffled through the heavy wood. The High Council requests an audience regarding the Blood Moon incidents, and Matron Oleander is demanding to know the whereabouts of her head maid. Thalassa's stomach dropped. Oleander, the woman who had sentenced her to this fate, who had watched with cruel satisfaction as she was sent to die. If she found out Thalassa had survived the night, spent it in the king's rooms. Caliph turned to her, his expression hard. Stay here. I can't stay here, Thalassa protested. I have duties. If I don't show up, they'll accuse me of theft. Or worse. I am the law in this kingdom, Thalassa. His tone shifted, becoming the authoritative voice of a king. But when he saw her pale face, his eyes softened. He walked to a small cabinet and pulled out a silk robe, tossing it to her. Cover yourself. You are no longer a maid. From this moment, you are the king's personal physician. Thalassa caught the robe, the fabric slipping through her fingers like water. But I don't have the herbs anymore. They broke. Kayla stepped close, tilting her chin up with one finger. Then use the truth. Tell them you are the only one who can touch the king without being torn apart. It's a power they will fear, but they will respect it. He released her and strode toward the door. Before he opened it, he looked back, his amber eyes holding hers. Do not leave this room until I return. And then he was gone, leaving Thalassa alone with the silk robe and the weight of a lie that was rapidly becoming the truth. The Royal Conservatory was a sanctuary of glass and green, a dome of crystalline panes that trapped the weak winter sunlight and turned it into something warm and golden. Thalassa stood among the hanging ferns and climbing ivy, her fingers brushing over the silver-veined leaves of a moon lily. The air here was clean, free from the suffocating weight of courtly eyes and whispered accusations. Caliph had summoned her here an hour after his meeting with the council. He had not told her what they discussed, but she could see the toll it had taken. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and the black veins that had receded during the night were creeping back toward his throat. He sat on a stone bench near a trellis of winter roses, his head in his hands. The council, Thalassa asked softly, stepping out from behind the ivy. Vultures, Caliph rasped. He rubbed his temples, his large hands trembling slightly. They smell blood in the water. They know the blood moon nearly broke me. They're already discussing a regency, already picking out which of them will sit on my throne while I rot in a padded cell. Thalassa walked toward him, her instincts as a healer overriding her fear. She knelt before him, placing her hands on his knees. The moment their skin touched, a visible ripple of relief washed over him. His breathing slowed, the frantic pulse at his throat stilled. You're not rotting anywhere, Caliph. He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. My mind is intact, for now. But the effort it takes to keep the wolf down, it's like holding back an ocean with a wooden fence. It burns, Thalassa. Every second of every day it burns. Without thinking, Thalassa reached up and took his hands in hers. The golden spark flared again, warm and bright, and Caliph exhaled shakily. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show you what? Your scars, not the ones on your back, the ones you hide." Caliph hesitated. Then slowly he unbuttoned his tunic, pulling it aside to reveal the mark over his heart. Thalassa's breath caught. The shadow poison mark was worse than she had imagined. A jagged, darkened web spread from a central point just above his heart, pulsing with a faint, sickly purple light. Black veins radiated outward like the roots of a dying tree, crawling up toward his collarbone, down toward his ribs. "A shadow-poisoned blade," Caliph explained, his voice hollow. "From the Great War 10 years ago. The Eastern Kingdom's assassins used them. The blade itself was nothing, just steel. But the poison, Shrafon, it feeds on alpha rage. The angrier I get, the more it spreads. The council thinks I'm losing my mind to nature, but it's this. I'm being eaten alive from the inside out." Thalassa's heart broke for him. This man who everyone feared as a tyrant was a soldier dying a slow, lonely death in a gilded palace. She reached out her fingers, hovering over the mark. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I'm alone," he confessed, his voice breaking. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against her shoulder. "When I can smell you, the poison goes cold. It's like the sun coming out after a century of night." Thalassa felt tears slip down her cheeks. She had spent her life feeling broken because she had no scent, believing she was a mistake of nature. But as she held the Alpha King's head against her shoulder, she realized she was the only person on Earth who could offer him peace. She wasn't a null. She was a sanctuary. "I'll find a way to heal this," she promised, her voice gaining strength. "I may not have the Royal Library's knowledge, but I know the old ways. My mother was a healer in the fringes. She taught me that every poison has a shadow, and every shadow has a light." Caliph pulled back, his amber eyes searching hers. For the first time, there was no dominance in them, only profound, aching gratitude. "Why are you doing this, Thalassa? I took you captive. I forced you into this lie." "Because," she said, wiping her eyes and offering him a small, shaky smile, "I know what it's like to be a monster in the eyes of everyone else, and I know you're not one." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. He leaned in, and Thalassa's breath hitched. This was it, the kiss that had been interrupted the night before. His lips were an inch from hers, his breath warm against her skin. "When I kiss you, Thalassa," he whispered, his voice rough with desire and restraint, "I won't stop until you're claimed before the entire pack. I won't stop until everyone knows you're mine." Her heart thundered in her chest. She closed her eyes, tilting her face up. The crash of shattering glass echoed through the conservatory. They both turned to see Matron Oleander standing by the entrance, a basket of fallen rose petals at her feet. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure vitriolic hatred. "So," the head maid hissed, her eyes darting between Thalassa's hands on the king's bare chest and Caliph's half-dressed state. The little scentless rat didn't just find her voice. She found her way into the king's bed. Caliph stood, his posture shifting from vulnerable man to commanding alpha in an instant. "Matron Oleander, leave, now!" "I will leave, your majesty," Oleander sneered, backing toward the door. "But the council will be very interested to know that their king is being healed by a servant who practices the dark arts of seduction." She turned and fled, her footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. The peace of the conservatory vanished, replaced by the cold weight of coming storm. Thalassa looked at Caliph, dread settling in her gut. "She's going to tell them," she whispered. Caliph pulled his tunic, closed, his jaw set. He looked at her, his gaze once again the cold, hard steel of a king. "Let her. I'm tired of hiding, Thalassa. If they want a war, I'll give them one. But they will not take you from me." The throne room was a cavern of cold marble and echoing judgment. High above stained glass windows depicted the history of the Nightshade lineage. Great wolves tearing through enemies, alphas standing victorious over fallen kingdoms. But today the atmosphere felt less like a celebration of power and more like an execution. Thalassa stood in the center of the floor, stripped of her physician's coat and forced back into the simple drab linen of a maid. It was a calculated move by the High Council, a reminder of her place. Standing in a semicircle before her were 5 elders, their scents heavy with old parchment, sour musk, and sharpening aggression that made her hair stand on end. Lord Mordain stood at the center, his silver hair gleaming in the dim light, his face carved from stone. Behind her, elevated on the black obsidian throne, sat Caliph. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, but she did not turn. She knew if she saw the pain in his eyes, her courage would fail. "Thalassa Ravencroft," Mordain began, his voice like dry leaves skittering over stone. "A null. A shifter with no scent, no rank, and until 2 days ago, no voice. You stand accused of high seduction and the use of forbidden scent magic to manipulate the Alpha King's mind. I have used no magic, Thalassa said. Her voice was small, but it did not waver. Matron Oleander testifies that she found you in a state of undress with His Majesty. Mordain continued, a cruel sneer curling his lip. She claims the air was thick with a scent that should not exist. How does a scentless girl suddenly smell like a siren's trap, unless you are using blood alchemy to mask your true nature? It wasn't alchemy, Thalassa said, her hands clenching at her sides. I was hiding. I used herbs to suppress my heat because I didn't want to be a pawn in your games. I am not a null. I'm different. A ripple of mocking laughter went through the room. Different, Mordain repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. You are a servant who saw an opportunity to bet a king while he was weak. Enough. The sound of Calith's voice was like a thunderclap. He stood from the throne, his presence filling the room until the air felt thin. He descended the steps, his boots clicking rhythmically on the marble, until he stood directly behind Thalassa. He did not touch her, but the heat of him was a shield at her back. Lord Mordain, Calith said, his voice dangerously low. You speak of my weakness as if it is a political talking point. You forget that while I fought the Shadow War on the front lines, you were tucked away in your libraries counting your gold and your grievances. Mordain's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. With respect, Your Majesty, the law is clear. A king must mate with an alpha or a high omega to ensure the strength of the bloodline. To take a thing like this as a consort is to invite the collapse of our biology. A thing, Calith repeated, his eyes beginning to swirl with molten gold. You dare call her a thing in my presence? She has bewitched you, Your Majesty, Mordain argued. The law demands you undergo the ritual of purging, or we will be forced to declare you unfit to rule. The threat hung in the air like poison fog. Declaring a king unfit during a blood moon cycle was a death sentence. He would be stripped of his title and left in the feral woods to be hunted by his own guards. Thalassa felt the tremor in Calith's aura. The shadow poison over his heart was reacting to his anger, the purple light beginning to bleed through the fabric of his shirt. He was reaching his limit. You want a ritual of purging? Calith asked, his voice dropping to a growl. Fine, but we shall do it the old way, by the blood trial. The council went silent. The blood trial was an ancient, brutal test where a mate's worth was proven through a physical and spiritual link. If the bond was false, both would die. If it was true, the council's authority was permanently revoked. Calith, no, Thalassa whispered, turning to look at him. You're too weak for the trial. The poison will kill you. Calith looked down at her, a sad, beautiful smile touching his lips. He reached out his thumb, brushing a tear from her cheek. I would rather die in the trial with you, Thalassa, than live 1,000 years as a king without you. He turned back to the council, his voice booming through the hall. 3 days from now, under the waning moon, Thalassa Ravencroft will prove she is no null, and I will prove she is my queen. If we fail, the throne is yours. If we succeed, Lord Mordain, you will be stripped of your titles and exiled. Mordain's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his face, but he nodded slowly. Accepted. Guards, take the girl to the high tower. She is to have no contact with the king until the trial begins. 2 guards stepped forward, gripping Thalassa's arms. She looked up at Calith, her heart screaming. He leaned in his lips, brushing her ear one last time. Don't stop breathing my name, Thalassa. I'll find you in the dark. And then she was pulled away, dragged from the throne room, leaving Calith standing alone in the center of the vultures, the shadow over his heart pulsing like a dying star. The high tower was less a room and more a cage of stone and wind. Perched at the highest point of the palace, the air was thin and bitingly cold. Thalassa paced the small circular floor, her footsteps echoing the frantic rhythm of her heart. Below, the kingdom looked like a toy set of flickering torches and shadows, but her eyes were fixed on the royal wing where she knew Calith was struggling against the encroaching darkness of the shadow poison. I can't just sit here, she whispered to the empty air. If he goes into the blood trial with that poison in his veins, he won't survive the first minute. She turned her attention to the only belongings the guards hadn't stripped from her, a small leather pouch of dried herbs she had managed to hide in the hem of her skirt. She emptied them onto a stone table. Crushed lavender, dried sage, a few withered petals of moonlily. It was a healer's kit for a common cold, not a remedy for a king's curse. Desperate, Thalassa began to search the room. The high tower had once been an observatory for the kingdom's mages before the wars, before the council had deemed magic too dangerous. In the corners, hidden under layers of dust and cobwebs, she found old jars of minerals and forgotten scrolls. She pulled out a crumbling piece of parchment, her hands trembling. It wasn't a spell, It was a biological chart of the primal Omega. No, not Omega. Scent Eater. Thalassa's breath caught as she read the ancient script. The text explained that a null wasn't missing a scent. They were scent eaters. Their bodies acted as natural filters designed to absorb and neutralize the excess aggression and toxic energy of their alpha counterparts. I'm not just a match for him. Thalassa realized, her hands shaking. I'm his antidote. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The reason Kaleth felt peace in her presence wasn't just because she smelled good. Her very biology was pulling the shadow poison out of him, filtering it, purifying it. But the process was incomplete. For a permanent cure, she needed to trigger a complete synthesis, a rare event where the scent eater willingly takes the full weight of the alpha's curse into their own body to purify it. Blood synthesis. But she was locked in a tower, and Kaleth was being guarded by men who wanted him dead. Suddenly, a small scratching sound came from the window. Thalassa spun around to see a small gray wolf pup squeezing through the iron bars. Around its neck was a silk ribbon stained with a drop of black oily blood. Kaleth's blood. She knelt and untied the ribbon. The blood on it throbbed with a sickly purple light. The poison was reaching his heart. If she didn't act tonight, there would be no king left to stand trial. Listen to me, she whispered to the pup, her voice thick with urgency. You have to get back to him. Tell him to open the ventilation shafts. Tell him I'm coming. The pup tilted its head, then turned and squeezed back through the bars, disappearing into the night. Thalassa stood, her jaw set with determination. She knew the architecture of the palace from her days as a maid. The high tower was connected to the king's chambers through a series of narrow service tunnels used to heat the rooms during winter. It was a vertical maze of soot and heat, but it was her only way out. She tore a strip of fabric from her dress and soaked it in water from her wash basin, tying it around her face. She grabbed the moonlily petals and the shadow poison ribbon, tucking them into her bodice. If she could reach him, she could use her own blood as a catalyst to draw the poison out. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she pried loose a rusted floor grate in the corner of the room. The dark, narrow shaft yawned beneath her, a throat of blackness and unknown danger. I was never a ghost, Kaleth, she muttered, sliding into the darkness. I was the light you were looking for. The crawl was agonizing. The stone was jagged, tearing at her hands and knees. The heat from the lower furnaces made it hard to breathe even through the wet cloth. But as she moved, she felt the pull, a psychic tug in her gut that grew stronger the closer she got to the king. Her scent-eater nature was acting like a compass, drawing her toward the source of the toxicity she was born to heal. Finally, she reached a vent that looked down into Kaleth's private study. Below, he was slumped in a chair, his shirt torn open. The shadow mark over his heart had grown into a web of black veins that reached up toward his throat. He looked gray, his breathing shallow and ragged. Thalassa kicked the vent open and dropped into the room, landing in a heap of torn silk and soot. Thalassa. Kaleth's voice was a ghost of a sound. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. She was at his side in a second, catching him. Don't move. I know how to fix this, Kaleth, but it's going to hurt. Everything hurts, he groaned, his eyes flickering between gold and gray. Go back, Thalassa. If they find you here, they'll kill you. Let them try, she said, her eyes flashing with sudden, fierce power. She bit her own palm, drawing a line of bright red blood, and pressed it directly against the pulsing black mark on his chest. The contact was electric. The moment Thalassa's blood touched the shadow mark, the room seemed to tilt. A sound like 1,000 screaming winds filled the chamber, though the curtains remained still. Kaleth's back arched, his scream trapped in his throat as the black veins under his skin began to writhe. They didn't just fade. They were being pulled. Thalassa felt a cold, oily sensation creeping up her arm, a toxic chill that threatened to stop her heart. This was the burden of the scent eater, the agonizing task of becoming a vessel for the darkness of another. Hold on to me, Thalassa gasped, her vision blurring. Kaleth, don't let go. His hands found her waist, his grip bruising as he fought the urge to shift. The purple light of the curse began to transition, flowing from his chest through Thalassa's palm and into her own veins. But as the poison entered her, something miraculous happened. Her suppressed heat, long kept under lock and key, flared to life. Her blood didn't just carry the poison, it incinerated it. The room flooded with brilliant golden radiance. The scent of wild jasmine and winter honey became so potent, it was almost visible, a shimmering mist that pushed back the shadows. Kaleth's breathing hitched, then evened out. The gray pallor of his skin was replaced by a healthy, vibrant glow. The jagged mark over his heart shriveled and vanished, leaving behind nothing but smooth, unscarred skin, and a faint, glowing brand in the shape of a crescent moon. Thalassa slumped against him, her body trembling with exhaustion. The synthesis was complete. Thalassa, Caliph whispered, his voice rich and full of life. He pulled her into his lap, his heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against her ear. You did it. It's gone. The screaming in my head, it's just gone. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You're free. We're free, he corrected, and then his mouth descended on hers. The kiss was everything the interrupted moments had promised and more. It was desperate and claiming and healing all at once. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and Thalassa melted into him, the bond between them singing with completion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caliph rested his forehead against hers. You are mine, Thalassa Ravencroft. He said, his voice rough with emotion. And I am yours, now and forever. The crescent moon brand on his chest glowed softly, pulsing in time with the matching mark that had appeared over her own heart. They were bonded, truly, completely, and nothing would ever tear them apart. The sanctuary of their kiss lasted only moments. The heavy doors to Caliph's study were kicked open with a violence that shook the walls. Lord Mordain stood in the threshold, flanked by a dozen royal guards, their silver armor gleaming in the firelight. Behind them, Matron Oleander, her face twisted with triumphant malice. Treason, Mordain bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at them. The girl has escaped her tower and used blood magic to assault the king. Guards seize her, execute her on the spot. The guards hesitated. They weren't looking at a weak and dying king anymore. They were looking at a man who radiated power so immense the air around him hummed with it. Caliph stood, lifting Thalassa effortlessly in his arms, as if she weighed nothing, holding her against his chest like a precious treasure. Step back, Caliph commanded. It wasn't just a king's order. It was the Alpha's command, pure and absolute. The guards' knees buckled, their wolves instinctively bowing to the dominance in his voice. Two of them dropped their spears, hands going to their throats as if an invisible force was choking them. She has bewitched you, your majesty. Oleander shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. Look at the air. It's foul with her scent. Foul, Caliph stepped forward, and the golden mist of Thalassa's essence swirled around him like a royal cloak. You are blind, woman. This is the scent of the High Omega. This is the scent of the woman who just saved your king and your kingdom from a curse you were too cowardly to acknowledge. Lord Mordain's face went pale as he noticed the missing mark on Caliph's chest. The shadow poison that had been devouring the king for 10 years was gone. In its place, smooth skin and a faint glowing crescent moon brand. That is impossible, Mordain whispered. The shadow poison cannot be cured. Every healer in the kingdom tried, every mage, by your laws perhaps, Caliph interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. But Thalassa Ravencroft does not follow your laws. She is a scent eater, a peace bringer. The very legend your ancestors tried to erase so you could keep your alphas in a state of perpetual war. Thalassa stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at the council members, at the guards with their weapons half raised, at Mordain's expression of dawning horror. And she felt no fear. I am not a defect, she said, her voice echoing through the study. And I am not a prize. I am the balance you tried to destroy. She pushed gently against Caliph's chest, and he set her down, though his hand remained at her waist, steadying her. Thalassa stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the cold stone, and faced Lord Mordain. 20 years ago, she said, her voice steady and clear, you ordered the execution of every scent eater in Ashenvale. You called it the Purge. You burned them at the stake and called it justice. Mordain's jaw clenched, but he did not deny it. My mother was one of them, Thalassa continued. Alara Ravencroft. She was a healer. She saved lives. And you burned her alive while I watched from the shadows. A collective gasp went through the guards. Even Oleander took a step back, her triumph fading into uncertainty. I did what I had to do, Mordain said, but his voice lacked conviction. My brother made it a scent eater. The bond made him weak. When she died in childbirth, he went feral. He killed 12 innocents before we had to put him down like a rabid animal. I couldn't let that happen again. I couldn't watch another alpha destroy himself for a false bond. False? Thalassa's voice rose fierce and unbreaking. You think what your brother felt was false? You think his grief, his love, his loss, all of it was a lie? I think it made him vulnerable, Mordain shot back. And vulnerability kills, girl. I've lived long enough to know that. You've lived long enough to become a murderer, Thalassa said. She pulled the ancient scroll from her bodice, the one she had found in the high tower. Scent eaters are not witches. We're biological harmony. We absorb the toxins that rage creates. We are the cure to the madness you fear so much. She held up the scroll, her hand shaking but her voice strong. You didn't purge us because we were dangerous. You purged us because you were afraid of peace. The silence in the room was absolute. Lord Mordain stared at her, and for the first time something cracked in his granite expression. Pain. Old Buried never acknowledged pain. I gave your mother a quick death, he said quietly. She begged for mercy, and I granted her a blade instead of the pyre. That was all the kindness I could spare. The lass's breath hitched, tears blurring her vision. You think that makes it right? No, Mordain said, but it was all I could do and still sleep at night. Caliph moved to stand beside Thalassa, his hand finding hers. The crescent moon brands on their chests pulsed in unison, glowing softly through their clothes. The blood trial is cancelled, Caliph declared. The proof is complete. The bond is real, the poison is gone. But know this, Lord Mordain, there are others who share your views. Purge loyalists who even now plot in the shadows. They will not accept this change easily. Mordain's eyes widened slightly. Your Majesty, I swear I know nothing of any conspiracy. I believe you, Caliph said, but your legacy created them. And tonight we end that legacy. He turned to the guards. 2 days hence, at sunset, Thalassa Ravencroft will be crowned Luna Queen of Ashenvale before the entire pack. Lord Mordain, you will not be executed. You will witness what you tried to destroy. And perhaps in time you will write the true history of the Scent Eaters so no one else makes your mistakes. Mordain stood frozen, stunned by the unexpected mercy. Finally he bowed his head. As you command, your Majesty. Caliph's gaze shifted to Matron Oleander, and all warmth vanished from his eyes. You, however, showed no grief, only cruelty. You are stripped of your rank and exiled from Ashenvale. You will leave tonight and never return. Oleander's face went white. Your Majesty, please. Take her, Caliph said to the guards. Now. 2 guards seized Oleander by the arms and dragged her from the room, her protests fading into the corridor beyond. When the doors closed again, Caliph turned to Thalassa, his expression transforming from king to mate in a heartbeat. Are you all right? Thalassa nodded, though her legs felt weak. I confronted the man who killed my mother, and I didn't break. No, Caliph said, pulling her into his arms. You didn't break. You became a queen. The next day was a flurry of preparation. Thalassa was moved to the queen's chambers rooms that had stood empty for 2 generations. Seamstresses measured her for a coronation gown. Courtiers taught her the protocols of court. And through it all, Caliph stayed close, never more than a room away, as if afraid she might disappear. But there was one person Thalassa had not seen since the trial. Lady Amaryllis. The High Alpha from the Northern Wastes had been conspicuously absent from all proceedings, until the evening before the coronation when she requested a private audience in the royal gardens. Thalassa found her standing by a frozen fountain, her crimson cloak stark against the snow. Amaryllis turned at her approach, and Thalassa braced for anger, for jealousy, for cruelty. Instead, she saw only resignation. So, Amaryllis said, her voice quiet, the Null who was not a Null, the Scent Eater of legend. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I suppose I should hate you. You took the match that was meant to be mine. I didn't take anything, Thalassa said. The bond chose us. Neither of us had control. Amaryllis nodded slowly. I know. I've seen true mate bonds before, rare as they are. She stepped closer, studying Thalassa's face. You love him, truly. I do. Then you have my blessing for what it's worth. Amaryllis pulled a small velvet pouch from her cloak. This is moonstone from the Northern Wastes. Tradition says it brings clarity to new queens. I had hoped to wear it myself, but she pressed it into Thalassa's hand. It belongs to you now. Thalassa's throat tightened. Thank you, my lady. Just Amaryllis. She turned to go, then paused. Take care of him, Thalassa, and take care of this kingdom. It needs healing more than it needs alliances. And then she was gone, her footsteps crunching through the snow, leaving Thalassa alone with the weight of unexpected grace. 2 days after the blood synthesis, as the sun set over Ashenvale, the capital city transformed into a sea of flickering torches. Thousands of shifters gathered beneath the great balcony of the palace, their murmurs rising like the hum of a disturbed hive. Rumors had spread through the streets like wildfire. The Alpha King had been cured, and the Null Maid was a hidden saint. Inside the palace dressing rooms, Thalassa stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, and for the first time in her life, she did not recognize herself. She was no longer wearing the soot-stained rags of a servant. She was draped in a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered with embroidered silver threads echoing the stars above. The fabric hugged her body and flowed behind her like liquid night. Her dark hair had been washed and braided with white moon lilies, and around her throat, Amaryllis's moonstone gleamed softly. For the first time, she wasn't wearing suppressants. Her scent, now a rich, calm melody of blooming jasmine and ancient honey, flowed freely from her skin. It acted as a natural sedative to the jagged nerves of everyone in the room. Maids who had once ignored her now moved with quiet reverence. The door opened and Caliph entered dressed in his full royal regalia. Black leather and silver armor, a cloak of wolf fur draped over his shoulders, and the crown of Ashenvale resting on his copper hair, a circlet of blackened steel and obsidian. When his eyes met hers in the mirror, he stopped dead. "You look like the dawn," he whispered, crossing the room to press a firm, warm kiss to her forehead. "Are you ready? Once we step out there, there's no going back to the shadows." Thalassa turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "I spent 20 years in the shadows, Caliph. I'm ready for the light." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could break hearts and mend them all at once. "Then let's show them their queen." The balcony was a stage of stone and sky. When Caliph and Thalassa stepped out into the cold night air, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Thousands of voices rose in a cacophony of cheers, questions, and uncertainty. But on the edges of the terrace, tucked behind the heavy stone pillars, figures moved in shadow. Conspirators who could not accept the change. Purge loyalists who believed scent-eaters were abominations, no matter what the king declared. One of them, hidden in the bell tower across the square, raised a crossbow. The bolt was tipped with void iron, a metal that could pierce any shifter's hide and prevent regeneration. It was aimed directly at Caliph's throat. Caliph stepped to the edge of the balcony, raising his hand to silence the crowd. The noise died down to a murmur and then to silence. "People of Ashenvale," he began, his voice carrying across the square like thunder. "For 10 years you have feared the madness of the crown. You have seen your king become a beast locked away during blood moons, a prisoner to the poison in his veins." He paused, letting the words settle. "But tonight the moon brings no madness, only clarity." He turned to Thalassa, pulling her forward. The torchlight caught the silver threads in her gown, making her shimmer like a star. "I present to you your queen, Thalassa Ravencroft, the woman who took the poison into her own soul so that our kingdom might breathe again." A cheer began to erupt, but Thalassa's scent-eater instincts suddenly flared. The air didn't just smell of celebration. She caught a whiff of cold steel and the bitter, oily scent of void iron. Her eyes darted to the bell tower. She saw the glint of moonlight on the bolt. "Caliph, down!" she screamed. She didn't wait for him to react. She threw herself in front of him just as the assassin released the trigger. The bolt hissed through the air, aimed for the king's throat. Time seemed to slow. Thalassa braced for the impact, but as the bolt entered the aura of her scent, the golden mist around her thickened instinctively. It was a physical manifestation of her protective power, a shimmering barrier of pure Omega energy. The bolt struck the golden haze and shattered into 1,000 harmless splinters, raining down on the balcony like glittering snow. The crowd gasped in a collective breath. Caliph's face transformed from shock to a terrifying primal fury. His wolf didn't break free. It obeyed. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the balcony, he pointed toward the bell tower. "Guards, bring me the coward who dares!" Within seconds, the royal guards swarmed the tower. The assassin tried to flee, but he was cornered, dragged down the stone steps and thrown into the square below. Thalassa stepped to the edge of the balcony, her scent projecting a wave of such absolute crushing truth that every shifter in the square felt it in their bones. The assassin fell to his knees, trembling, his own wolf collapsing in shame inside him. "You tried to kill a king to preserve your lies," Thalassa said, her voice echoing over the square. "But you cannot kill the truth. The era of the Shadow Wars is over. The era of the Purge is over. This is the age of balance." Caliph walked up behind her, placing a heavy protective hand on her shoulder. He looked out at the people, at the thousands of faces turned up toward them. "Behold your queen," he thundered, "the one who protects the protector, the one who will never let darkness rule this kingdom again." The city erupted. It wasn't just a cheer for a new ruler. It was the sound of a broken people finally exhaling, finally believing that peace was possible. A council elder stepped forward with the Luna crown, a delicate circlet of silver and moonstone, ancient and beautiful. Caliph took it and with both hands placed it upon Thalassa's head. "By the old laws and the new," he declared, "I name you Luna Queen of Ashenvale, protector of the weak, guardian of peace, my mate, my equal, my heart." The pack, thousands strong, knelt in unison. The sound of their bodies hitting the cobblestones was like thunder. Thalassa looked up at Caliph, and for the first time the Knoll girl felt entirely beautifully whole. The morning after the coronation was quiet. In the great hall, Caliph and Thalassa sat side by side as the captured assassin and his three co-conspirators were brought forth. "You are hereby sentenced to death for attempted regicide," Caliph declared. "Your names will be struck from all records. Your bloodlines will bear the shame of your cowardice." The conspirators were led away. When the hall emptied, Caliph turned to Thalassa. "Is it enough? The justice of the coronation, does it make up for the years of silence?" Thalassa stood and wrapped her arms around him. "It wasn't the kingdom's approval I needed. It was the chance to be seen. You did that before the crown ever touched my head." He kissed the top of her head. "What do you want to do now? You're a queen. You can reshape this kingdom." Thalassa pulled back, her eyes bright. "I want to find the others, the scent eaters who are still hiding. I want to build them a sanctuary. Then we build it together." 4 months later, spring transformed Ashenvale from ice to bloom. In the royal gardens, construction of the Scent Eater Academy was nearly complete, a beautiful structure of glass and stone where those who had hidden could finally learn their true purpose. Thalassa stood in the great hall one morning, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach. 4 months pregnant, barely showing, but the healers confirmed the child was healthy and strong. A messenger arrived with a letter from the Eastern Territories. Thalassa broke the seal and read, tears filling her eyes. "What is it?" Caliph asked, joining her. "A young girl," Thalassa whispered, 12 years old. She thought she was broken and null, but when her father went feral during a hunt and she touched him, she saw golden light. "Just like me." Caliph's eyes widened. "Another scent eater." "She says she knows of 3 others, all hiding, all afraid." He placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "Then we bring them here, to safety, to the academy." Thalassa nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "We're not extinct. We were just waiting for someone brave enough to stop hiding first." She looked out the window at the academy rising against the spring sky. Below, former nulls worked alongside high alphas, building something new together. "Our child will grow up in a world that celebrates difference," Caliph said softly. Thalassa turned to him, her eyes fierce with love and purpose. "We didn't just heal you, Caliph. We healed the kingdom's soul." They stood together in the sunlit hall, hands joined, hearts bonded by the crescent moon marks that still glowed faintly beneath their clothes. Outside, white wolves ran through the blooming meadows, their howls no longer cries of rage, but songs of joy. The age of the balanced heart had begun, and it would last for generations.